Hello my beautiful lily pads, welcome back to my channel. It is your friend Kunamani Caro. Today we are reacting to a brand new The Odd One Out video, every form of animation. Judging from the title, I guess we can all guess what it's gonna be about. I'm excited to see what he has to say about it. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe because any and all interaction with this video does this channel wonders. We are very close to the subscriber count to finally getting at least the first step of monetization. So please subscribe. Let's get into this.
This brick is alive.
Is it?
Not convinced? Well, what if I did this?
I'm gonna do a backflip. That's gonna look so cool, Brickathy.
Ooh, I
What are
like
you
this.
boys doing?
Shit. Grandpa's dead. Aww.
Are you convinced now? Did the brick feel more alive? I mean, sure, it's still a brick that can't move on its own, but maybe because I put googly eyes on it and gave it a family, you can connect with this brick, and it made you feel emotions. Convincing you that something inanimate is animate is the main goal of the animate-or. They're nothing more than deranged
Animator.
frauds. For the last century, animators have innovated new techniques and styles to this medium, taking it from a spinning
so
wheel
cool.
that doesn't even use electricity to Spider-Verse. And today, I'm going to talk about all the processes and innovations that have brought the medium of animation to right now. But first, let's go all the way back to the beginning of film, when it was all
Charlie
black and white
Chaplin.
and people had to put up text whenever they talked. Early on, filmmakers discovered a very simple trick to make anything appear alive in front of a camera. And that simple trick was called stop. If you're filming something and then stop the camera and then move the thing.
I love stop motion films. They're always so wonderful. Like Coraline, it's so pretty. Like how they can make it like that. There's not that much anymore, right? Unless there's like one I missed. I don't think anyone does stop motion anymore. Like the earliest, I mean, yeah, not earliest. Like the most recent stop motion I can think of is YouTube with most popular girls in school. I think that's like the only stop motion out there.
Thing slightly, capture a new image, move the thing again, and continue to do that a tedious amount of times. On the film, that thing now magically looked like it move on its own. And
Yeah,
with
but it
this
takes
technique, you can
forever.
make literally anything appear to be moving.
Oh, the old films
Anything.
look so creepy.
But some filmmakers took this art form to an
Oh,
extreme.
look, it's Wallace and Gromit. I don't know who that fucking dog is. Chicken Run, Shaun the Sheep. I like Little Gromit. Oh, it's the little clay people. Does anyone remember those from Newgrounds? You have to be very old to remember them. Oh, I'm so surprised he put the clay people in. My model is covering them. Let me move. Let me move it. Look at the blue little clay people. Oh my god. Those used to be my favorite. Then the creator turned out to be a douche, and he scammed a bunch of people. Does anyone else remember that?
Level and created whole characters out of clay and a posable metal wire system called an armature. Now animators can sculpt unique
Nightmare
characters
Before
that bend and
Christmas.
pose in much more believable ways. With stop motion, you don't need to hire a real dinosaur or giant monkey to make a movie about a dinosaur or giant monkey. I'm sorry you didn't get the job, Phil.
Let me move my model back.
You know, I just had a crazy idea. What if we made our entire puppet's head interchangeable?
Chicken Run.
Now they can make any facial expression and mouth shape possible. We will have to sculpt out hundreds of different heads though, but I mean, come on, that'll be fun.
Yeah,
That's why we're
no.
extreme, baby.
It's not
Stop
gonna be
motion
fun.
movies are still being made and enjoyed to this day. And while new technology does help make the overall process easier, animators are still using the same techniques that were used on King Kong back in the 1920s, where they carefully pose out a character's every movement frame
That's so
by
cool.
frame in order. Stop motion is a medium that I can't even begin to understand how they do, let alone make it look good, you know? Having a stop motion character in gravity-defying poses, making hundreds of different faces, is done solely to make the character feel more alive. And sometimes, to help sell the realism, animators will mimic quirks that only happen in live-action films. I always chuckle when I see a lens flare in an animated movie, because, like, where did you come from? There's not even a camera lens. Unlike me, though, who's always got a camera rolling. Hey, how's it going? Uh-oh. Oh, no! Did you catch that? Did you see the motion? Look at this lizard eating bug. Oh, we got him. Now let's rewind the clip and pause right here. This lizard moves so fast that the camera can't even capture its movements correctly, and he transmogrifies into an amorphic blob that barely even resembles a lizard. But do not fret, dear viewer. This is called motion blur, and it's absolutely natural. Fast-moving objects are hard to see in real life anyway, so this blurry blob only showing up for one frame actually helps sell the idea that this little guy is moving quickly. If you watch any movie frame by frame, you'll find motion blur everywhere, and you won't even notice. So how do animators who are taking hundreds of still photos handle this naturally occurring phenomenon with things in motion? Easy, they'll draw smear. Animators draw their own blurry blob.
Oh, they literally have to draw in the smears? I never knew that. I thought it just kind of like naturally occurred, even with like fast moving pictures. So they have to literally draw a smear to help sell the actor motion. That is so cool.
Frame to mimic fast movements. Bodies can stretch, arms can multiply. Basically, we can sneak in nightmares as long as it's only shown for one frame. Smears, while being very fun to draw, can look very weird and goofy on their own. But in the context of the whole shot, you barely even notice they're there. Okay, maybe now you'll notice them, but that's only because I pointed them out. And since animators are bad boys and don't play by the rules, they can make smears out of anything. Even in stop motion, we can sculpt a physical smear frame like how they did in Leica's Paranorman, which, if you haven't seen, is going to be a new favorite. Smear frames can be used anytime, anywhere, unless you were an animator in the 1920s and 30s,
like the
didn't know about them back then.
Illustration
in that
animation,
case, you would have been animating something called rubber. In the 1920s and 30s, animators were still figuring out some core principles of animation. Turns out there's 12 of them. Smear frames were used sparingly during this time, with animators usually only drawing characters with multiple limbs to show fast movements. The stretchy, wacky, and spiritually ascending smears that you all know and love weren't really used until the 1940s. Rubber hose characters have noodly, almost hose-like limbs that bend in all sorts of anatomically defying ways. Look at Mickey Mouse's noodle arms that I can now legally show you. The reason characters look like this is because drawing noodle arms and not worrying about anatomy is easier to draw. But like, just because something has noodle arms doesn't mean it's bad, you guys. What these animators were able to accomplish with the technology, if you could even call it that, is nothing short of dark magic. And the very same studio that made Steamboat Willie wanted to push the envelope and show the world that animation could be more. It doesn't just have to be noodly characters with Pac-Man eyes. They were going to animate a realistic woman with proportional arms that don't move in weird, exaggerated ways. And oh god, her noodle arms are moving in weird, exaggerated ways. In 1934, Disney released a short called The Goddess of Spring, being their first attempt at animating a character with what was supposed to have real human anatomy. They still had a lot to learn, obviously. Now, animating a quote-unquote anatomically correct human is actually a much harder task than you might realize, and that's because of the uncanny valley. As characters get more and more human characteristics, we hit an interesting point right here when something looks almost like a human, but is just a little off. Our pattern recognition brains start setting off alarm bells and go, ugh, something is definitely wrong with that almost human. I am entering fight or flight right now. So if you're trying to make something look as close to a human as possible, but are just a tiny bit off, everything crumbles. The Goddess of Spring was still good practice for Disney because only 3 years later, they released the world's first fully animated feature film, Snow White. Can you really blame Disney for going 6 times over budget to make this movie? I mean, just look at how these human characters are moving. 10 years before Snow White, animated humans looked like this. So going from this to this in only 10 years?
That's pretty amazing.
How? I can't get over how real these human characters look sometimes. almost too real. Well, I think you're old enough to learn about the dangers of rotoscoping is the process of taking real-life footage and then manually tracing over every frame, resulting in an animation with unreal levels of realism. And I say unreal derogatorily. You're basically slapping a cartoon filter over live-action footage, but instead of simply slapping, you're spending multiple hours doing mindless and tedious drawing. Rotoscoping is not the same as filming a human actor and then later referencing that footage, like what Disney did for Sleeping Beauty or Alice in Wonderland or any movie ever because animators use references all the time. People had figured out how to rotoscope other people long before Snow White. So of course Disney, who was trying to convey real human movement, rotoscoped some shots. The problem with rotoscoping is that we start to sneak our way back to the bottom of the uncanny valley. Animated characters often do and should break the laws of physics. They can squash and stretch into weird proportions and be drawn in unique and interesting poses. And look, Snow White is still a masterpiece of a movie. The rotoscoping is fine, you barely notice it, it's good, it's a good movie, and it made Disney a lot of money. Also, how did Walt animate these shots of things reflecting in the water in 1937?
Oh, that's really nice.
What, they put special glass over paintings to make it look distorted or something? Who would be crazy enough to do that? If you made a whole movie entirely rotoscoped, what you end up with is Ralph Bakshi's The Lord of the Rings. Notice anything off about these characters' movements? Look at how Gandalf moved just a year ago in The Hobbit. Now, Lord of the Rings, Hobbit, Lord of the Rings. Almost every shot in this movie.
I never knew that The Lord of the Rings had like old animated movies. I always thought like the first adaptation was like those 2000 films. Oh. Learn something new every day.
Movie was rotoscoped, and the shots that weren't used live-action footage with a filter over it. I'm not saying that rotoscoping is bad. You just have to use it correctly. A character switching from traditionally animated to rotoscoped is incredibly funny, and always will be. The YouTuber Joel Javier makes very entertaining rotoscope skits that feel like a fever dream, and I mean that underogatorily. And a lot of music videos get away with rotoscoping because, admittedly, rotoscoping is a very cool visual. Now, I wish I could say the first Lord of the Rings movie was a hidden animation gem, but
no,
I don't know, it wasn't.
That looks really ugly.
It's not on my top 10, I'm sorry. It probably made a lot of nerds in the 70s happy, but thankfully The Lord of the Rings has been adapted into many other forms of media, like video games, Magic the Gathering cards, and anime. Anime? They're making a Lord of the Rings anime? They're making a Lord of the Rings anime. You thought Hollywood, California was the only place in the world making moving pictures?
No.
Japan's been making their own moving pictures too, and some of them are moving drawings. There are entire college courses on the history of anime, but you're not paying me tuition, so we're gonna have to skip over it. A lot of early anime is now lost media because cinemas didn't preserve film back then, and an earthquake destroyed many studios in 1923. Some Japanese animators created shorts out of paper cutouts because buying thousands of celluloid sheets was too expensive, and they had some very unique character designs. And some Japanese animators took inspiration from Disney and made shorts that looked very similar to America's rubber hose
they
characters.
really do look
Then by the
similar.
1940s, some major world events happened that got most of the world involved, and both American and Japanese animation studios were affected. But after all that, in 1948, one studio called Japan Animated Films, later bought out by Toei Animation, set out to be the Disney of the East.
Oh,
they
what is
made
that
cartoons
machine?
about magical schoolgirls, and are still in
Sally.
business to this day and made some other less popular shows. One animator who quit working at Toei created his own company and made an anime based off his comic
Astro
about
Boy.
a robot boy. Hey, I kind of like that art style of drawing humans with big expressive eyes. Let's do more of that. That same year, another studio made an anime about humans controlling giant robots. I wonder if that's going to inspire a whole new genre. And this guy was commissioned by American studios to make stop-motion Christmas movies like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer.
That Drummer Boy
Meaning
movie
Rudolph
scared the fuck
is
out of me when I was
anime.
little.
Nani? By the 1960s, Japanese shows started airing on televisions all across the globe, and they continued to make unique and interesting stories with amazing animations that were beloved by billions of people and grew into extremely profitable franchises. Like,
I don't
I'm
think
talking
Hello
the
Kitty is
most
considered an
profitable
anime,
franchise.
right?
By the 1970s, Disney was still very much the animated movie gold standard, making big budgeted movies with family-friendly values. Which is fine to do, kids love bright colors and talking animals that only cartoons can offer, but some studios realized that animation was a medium, not a genre, and made animated movies exclusively for adults. That's part of the reason why the first Lord of the Rings movie was entirely rotoscoped. It wasn't trying to be cartoony and over the top. It was trying to be real and gritty. Animation could be anything for anyone of any age. But really, if you think about it, there hadn't been a new way of showing people moving drawings since those very early days of black and white stop motion. In stop motion, you take a picture, move a figure, take a picture, move a figure. In cell animation, you take a picture, move a cell, take a picture, move a cell. Everything's just been a series of pictures moved manually in front of a camera this whole time?
Yeah.
Always has been.
You've got mail.
Oh. It says the entire animation and film industry is about to be flipped onto its head forever and ever.
Oh,
Yeah,
is that because
right.
of the
I'm sure this whole
invention of
computer
computers?
thing is just a
yeah,
fake.
the computers.
With the ever-increasing advancements of technology, we were able to achieve increasingly advanced achievements, like putting a guy on the moon and drawing silly little cartoons more efficiently. Gone are the days of having to physically draw everything out on paper and underpay a team of hundreds of pretty girls to hand paint every frame. Now we can use this fancy new computer to render everything out for us. All we have to do is create a real-life mold of our real-life human hand, then draw 350 triangles onto that hand, then
What?
manually measure out the X, Y, and Z coordinates of 800
Fuck
different data
that.
points. No, come on, this is gonna be so much faster. Put that pen.
Oh my god, no. That seems like such a headache. That's also why that shit takes forever, right?
Pencil down. Now we just program in a couple of keyframes and we get... Huh. We still don't have the processing power to render everything out. Oh, I know.
Yeah.
We'll just point this long exposure camera at the computer screen. Get these art supplies out of here. This is the future. And when everything's finished rendering, we'll get this. A whole human hand moving on its own without having to draw a single frame. This process is exactly what Utah University student Ed Catmull did in 1972. And while it might not have been more efficient than drawing everything out by hand, it showed that computers were capable of rendering out three-dimensional animations. This was made after we landed a man on the moon, by the way, so don't tell me this was CGI. As the computer's processing power grew exponentially, more and more filmmakers started seeing the benefits of using
that Terminator?
computer-generated images in
Ew,
movies.
what movie is that?
A decade
That's
after
ugly.
Catmull digitized his hand, films like Tron showcased characters racing on mind-boggling computer-generated light cycles. This might look,
I've never
you know,
seen
bad
Tron.
by today's standards,
Yeah.
but these graphics were something that audiences had never seen before. Plus,
That's
the
the
movie
start
takes
of it,
place
yeah.
inside of a computer, so this is probably what people thought the insides of a computer looked like anyways. At the time, computers did a great job at creating rigid geometric shapes, and animators used that to their advantage. Characters would still have to be animated traditionally on
I like your
cells, but
glove.
objects that weren't going to change shape, like black cauldrons, could now magically fly in circles around our characters. Disney really showed off the computer's rendering power during the climax of The Great Mouse Detective, when these two rodents fought each other inside
I've
a clock
never
tower,
heard of that
and
movie.
all the spinning gears were generated by a computer. Animators can now
cool.
make any complex shape move in a three-dimensional space without having to draw a single frame. I mean, you know, except for the characters, they still very much had to draw those. Computer graphics were here to stay as Disney integrated more of them into movies like these cars in Oliver and Company or Eric's ship in The Little Mermaid, and then they stopped using cells entirely. Starting with The Rescuers Down Under, Disney no longer used cells and made movies entirely digitally with a program called
Really?
CAPS. So if you ever wanted to own a cell of Joanna the Lizard eating an egg, that's too bad because they don't exist. Which sucks because Joanna was the best goddamn lizard Disney ever made. Don't touch me! TV shows and anime still use cells till about the year 2000-ish, but eventually everyone switched to digital. Now to color a frame, all you had to do was... So computers were great at making rigid,
Oh.
non-flexible shapes, but has anyone ever tried to make a computer... A group of computer scientists who were working for a small indie director named George Lucas were taking this art form to an extreme level and created whole characters completely generated by a
that
computer.
looks so cute, though.
Then a small entrepreneur named Steve Jobs hired those computer scientists and made his own company, Pixar. Yes, Steve Jobs was one of the founders of Pixar.
I didn't know
and
that.
he originally created the company to sell a high-end computer powerful enough to render 3D animations. But no one bought the computer because it cost $135,000. So the team scrapped the computer selling idea and just stuck with making computer-generated cartoons. But they soon discovered a unique problem. The computer had a hard time getting textures right, and everything, including babies, ended up looking like it was made out of plastic. So the team's clever work around this dilemma was to make a movie with the entire cast of characters actually made out of plastic.
Oh, that was
ants.
very smart.
You know, people don't know what ants are supposed to look like. It's fine. Pixar continued to develop new processes to get the computer to generate unique textures and lighting, like simulating human hair or fur, or lighting things in such a way to make everything appear underwater. No other studio was pioneering computer-generated images like Pixar was. And then in 2006, Disney bought Pixar. But I don't think Steve was too upset because 1 year later, he achieved his dream of selling a high-end computer. This time being a little more affordable. A little. Now, I want to squash any misconception that computers do all the animating. Animators still have to manually pose a character's body and facial expression off of a character's rig. Animators will build a complex system of nodes and bones that let them manually pose a...
Rigging is so difficult. As a VTuber, that's why you also gotta, like, pay someone to rig your model. It's like all numbers and shit. It's confusing.
Character into any position possible. It's kind of like a digital stop-motion puppet.
Yeah.
Or an actual puppet without any of the strings. All CG characters are just their own complicated version of Pinocchio. Using character rigs is really the only way of animating things in 3 dimensions. But it's not like we can use rigs in 2D animation. Here in the second dimension, we don't have a fancy Z-axis. 2D animation can only be done by hand-drawing 24 new images every second. Except we don't, I lied. Even all the way back when characters were animated with paper and cells, animators wouldn't draw a whole new frame every frame. Usually, they would animate pieces of a character and paint each piece on its own cell. You remember Robin, they only drew 1 body and 5 different heads. But because cells are a physical object that get harder to handle the more you have, animators could only break a character up into 2 or 3 different pieces. But now, thanks to the computer, we can break up a character into as many pieces as we'd like 4, or 5, or 173. Have you ever played around with the free and revolutionary animation software
that Microsoft
Pivot Stick Figure
background
Animator?
is
If you're the type
so
of person that
nostalgia.
says, "Oh, I suck at drawing. I can't even draw stick figures," then you're gonna love this program. On Pivot, you're given a pre-made stick figure or horse
Dropped
that
a
have
soda
these
can on
joints
it.
that
I
can
think
be
I broke
posed
it.
however you like. Each of these stick figures' limbs are just individual pieces that are connected in such a way that make it look like a stick figure. So to make these animations, we're not really drawing anything, we're just manually posing out a character like a digital puppeteer. I wasn't saying you can make a rig out of 173 pieces just to be funny, because that's how many pieces I'm made out of. That's right,
Wait, really?
me, even I'm a rig. And can I tell you a secret? Most TV shows use rigs too. Of course, hand-drawn traditional animation is still used to make these shows. It's not a lost art form or anything. But rigs are super useful at making
Bob's Burgers
still
actually
pretty
has some
high-quality
drawings in
levels
it.
of
It
animation,
looks like it's
but at a much
completely
cheaper
computerized.
cost. And as we all know, TV animation has to create more animation per budget. But maybe rig animation still isn't as cost-effective as you'd like. And maybe you're not a fan of the complicated puppet look and you want something that looks more human. Well, there's one more animation process we can try called motion. If we
thought
put
they
an
already did
actor
that.
inside one of these dorky ping pong suits,
Oh,
a
this-
computer can
okay, I was
pinpoint and
confusing it with
record
the
that
stop
actor's
motion.
exact movements. Now we can take those movements, slap a cartoon character's model over it, and we get an animation that looks like... Motion capture is the rotoscoping of 3D animation. It cuts costs, but the results are too human, and we're back at the bottom of the uncanny valley. That's why the kids from the
you
Polar
saw the
Express
Sonic,
look so
the original
nightmarish,
one.
because they are following the exact movements of Tom Hanks. Yes, Tom Hanks, the adult man, did some motion capture for the small, nameless hero boy from the Polar Express. There's probably a reason we haven't made a fully motion capture cartoon in over 10 years, because it looks weird. But I mean, that didn't stop one of these movies from winning an Oscar in
Which
animation.
one?
And before you ask, no, it wasn't Monster House or Tintin. It was Mars Needs Moms. Duh.
Really?
Just like rotoscoping, motion capture can be used correctly. Computer-generated characters acting side by side real human actors look decent. It's not that jarring that these creatures who exist in a live-action world are moving just like live-action people. And let's not forget all the VTubers who use motion capture technology to bring their jiggly assets to life. No matter what method someone uses to try and convince you that something else is alive, I think is incredibly cool. And I hope you think it's cool too. But maybe you don't think it's cool, and you don't care about animation, and you just put this video on in the background while you were cleaning. That's totally fine. I do that all the time. I just like learning about how all of my favorite animated pieces of media get created, because it's not always the same process. And I think it's great that new technology is allowing anyone to express themselves
nice.
in whatever way possible. A person expressing themselves. Those are the 3 key words here. From the big studios that are just now pioneering new and interesting styles with digital animation, to the indie studios that have access to incredible technology, which allow
I keep
anyone
hearing a
working
lot of
from their
things
bedrooms and their
about
pajamas.
what is it? Go back. The Amazing Digital Circus. Is that something I should react to? I hear that a lot on YouTube. I have no idea what it's about though.
That have access to incredible technology, which allow anyone working from their bedrooms in their pajamas to create some truly masterpieces of animation. So, if you're the type of person that likes to trick people into thinking that something is alive, then you deserve all the respect in the world. In fact, here are some cool people that made the animation in this video possible. Hello, you just made it to the end of this video.
This VTuber model is so funny. I found that video really interesting. There was a lot of it I had no idea about. Like, I know very little about animation, so that was pretty cool. What did you guys think? What did you find most interesting? That's what I want to know. Let me know in the comments, and I will see you guys again later. Bye.